This video contains basic kit details about future unreleased characters, so watch at your own risk. I feel like this has been done to make me specifically look stupid. Hello, I have no idea where I am right now. I guess I'm doing the video here. So about 10 months ago, I put out a video about Gorou and how his only role as a geo-buffer had been stolen by xilonen, a unit whose requirements directly oppose Gorou's and who made geo teams previously reliant on Gorou better in every way. She kind of demolished Gorou in the meta, so I made that video to pitch a silly little idea of archaic Petra Gorou. Instead of being used as a geo-buffer, he could be used as a sort of defensive unit, buffing defense and automatically collecting crystallizes, while also holding a useful artifact set. And maybe I don't fully need to explain this because a lot of you are actually aware of this video. You can see the views ticking up at a pretty normal rate, and then they started to go a little faster than normal, starting when? December 1st? Whose character kits were leaked around December 1st? So very basic kit outlines. Shibai is going to be a defense scaling lunar crystallized DPS. And this guy, whose name I refuse to pronounce on recording until he actually comes out and I can hear how they say it in game, he buffs lunar crystallized talent damage. So we have a defense scaling geo DPS, and we have her specialized buffer, who is also a geo unit. You know who's a defense geo buffer and likes 2 geo teammates? Combined with his regular defensive utility, Gorou is going to be a very strong and comfy option for Shibai. Shibai teams are perfectly made to fit Gorou in. Meanwhile, time has not been kind to xilonen. She used to be a unit that combined immense flexibility with immense power. She had a lot of teams that she was best in slot in, but a lot of specialist units have come out to replace her in almost all of her best teams. So xilonen has an upcoming banner, but she's lost a lot of her meta relevance, and Gorou has somehow scrambled his way back into the meta. So let's take some time to talk about these two. Okay, second day, second recording. Let's just ignore what's going on the side over here and do a quick run through of their kits so everybody's on the same page. As I mentioned, Gorou is a pretty hyper-specific buffer, pretty much only buffing geo-scaling defense damage and wanting 2 other geo teammates to do so. Most of his kit can be found within his skill, as this is basically where all of his buffing and all of his requirements come from. It grants extra bonuses based on how many geo characters are in your team. By default, with 1 geo character, which you get automatically with the inclusion of Gorou, it grants a defense bonus, and that's just a flat buff based on the skill's level. 2 geo characters gives you interruption resistance, and 3 geo characters gives you a flat 15% geo damage bonus. Unlike the defense, doesn't change with skill level. His skill places a flag on the ground, and if you stand within the circle around it, you'll get the buff. And his buff indicator even has a fun little visual. You get this paw above your character's head, and how many toes are lit up indicates what level of buff you have. I didn't really think about how insane toe indicator would sound before I said it, but now I've already said it and there's no going back. Anyways, now I've removed Yunjin, I only have 2 geo characters, and only 2 of the toes are lit up. His burst summons a version of the field that follows you around, periodically does off-field damage, and sucks in crystallized shards. And then the rest of his kit, his passives, and his constellations are just more supportive utility related to using his skill and burst. With of course a notable standout being C6, being up to 40% geo crit damage bonus. While xilonen is another geo buffer, she's essentially the exact opposite. Instead of being locked into mono geo teams and only buffing geo damage dealers and defense scalers, she gets locked out of mono geo teams. Xilonen specifically asks that you have 2 non-geo units in your team, specifically 2 units of crystallizable elements, Pyro, Hydro, Cryo, and Electro, which is at direct odds with Gorou's conditions. Her entire kit is also contained within her skill. Very convenient of you, thank you both. It's gonna be much easier to show this, so I'm not even gonna look at the numbers. Using her skill will make her go into this rollerblade mode, and depending on how many units you have of crystallizable elements, her infused normal attacks will get one of 2 effects. If she doesn't have 2 of these units, she just gets a basic 30% damage bonus, which these normal attacks are not dealing damage. But if you do have 2 of these units, she'll get Night Soul points when hitting normal attacks, which filling her Night Soul bar is what activates her Res Shred. And just like Gorou, she has her own indicator to the left of her Night Soul bar to show her what teammates she has. And of course, those indicate what res will be shredded. Okay, quick editors aside. This video, much like every video I ever make, didn't come out exactly as I expected, because I do my best to try to highlight units that people perceive as not good and use them in unconventional ways that might highlight certain strengths. But right now, Gorou is perceived to be a pretty good unit, and xilonen is actually the unfavored one, so I ended up talking about xilonen for a large part of this video, and while I do think the title Gorou's Revenge would accurately describe a video in which I talked about how Gorou is good and I probably don't need to tell you what to do with him, meanwhile xilonen is struggling to find a place, most of you probably came to this video expecting more Gorou talk, so I'll talk about it here, but I also promise you the xilonen stuff is really interesting. I'll round off this kit talking about the last few relevant things. A1 is a full party defense buff when he bursts, which is relevant if you have multiple defense scalars in your team. C1 and C2 are pretty unremarkable constellations. C2 is a duration extension to his burst, which can be nice, but it's not all too impactful considering his buff lasts for a little bit after his burst expires. C6 is a good damage con, as I mentioned, and that only leaves us with C4, which is an interesting one. If you have at least 2 Geo teammates, his burst will also heal 50% of his defense once every 1.5 seconds. That is fake healing. Even though he's supposed to be a defense scaler, Gorou has some of the lowest base defense in the game as a bow user. However, just because it's not real healing doesn't mean it's not impactful. You can kind of think of this as a Yansan healing. It's worse than a Yansan healing, but you can kind of conceptualize it in the same way. It's a small defensive utility that you can use to supplement other defense. And as I've been going over, Gorou has other defensive uses. He gives a straight up defense buff. That's a defensive stat. It makes you take less damage. He creates and collects crystallized shields. He provides his own interruption resist on top of the crystallizes. Putting those things together, Gorou is a surprisingly functional defensive unit when you have another Geo unit in the team, and that's kind of what the Archaic Petra Gorou video is centering around. Gorou being surprisingly capable at something he is not at all meant to do. You can watch that video for more information on build paths and things. Petra Gorou isn't what you're going to be running in Shibai teams. You'll probably be running something like Exile. Maybe Serenade will be a preferred choice. In those teams, he's going to be good because they work very well with his intended kit design, so I don't really feel the need to talk about him further. Besides saying, oh my god, Shibai mains, brace yourselves for the energy needs. Gorou has it unbelievably rough out here. Now, most of this probably isn't really new to you. xilonen is one of the simplest characters in the game, and a lot of you probably already know how she works. But not only do I think it's valuable to show you that there isn't any weird, hidden, strange part of her kit, I think that this also perfectly highlights her biggest strength. I started this video repeatedly mentioning that xilonen is not the most meta-relevant unit anymore. The only buff inherent to xilonen's kit is her res shred. Her being a Natlan unit and being able to hold scroll and grant its full effects are really nice, but that's not a property unique to her. And res shred being the only damaging stat that she contributes makes her uniquely easy to push out of a lot of teams. Res shred is one of the few stats in this game with actual diminishing returns, because how it works is, like xilonen, very simple. Enemies have an innate elemental resistance to all elements. If an enemy isn't supposed to be particularly resistant to an element, their resistance to that element will usually be 10%. And as the name suggests, res decrease takes that number and decreases it. For xilonen's 36%, the first 10% applies normally, but once an enemy drops below 0% resistance, all res shred effectively gets halved. So the first bit of res shred you get is the strongest. Everything after that has greatly reduced effectiveness. And over the past year, we've gotten a lot of units who shred res for their specific archetype, while also doing a lot of other things for that archetype on top of the res shred. So xilonen, who all she has is her dinky little res shred, she was the first to be kicked out. Escoffier and Skirk have such hard restrictions that running Dahlia, an unleveled Dahlia as a last slot, is better than xilonen simply by nature of his element. Chaska's team building restrictions really don't like Geo units. Varesa has far better team synergy with Chevreuse. Mualani's now running Mona Sucrose cores. Even Mawika's best cheating teams don't run xilonen anymore. Iansan kicked her out. But there's that word. Cheating. because that is the one thing that xilonen has over all of these dedicated supports. While they all give better numbers and have more synergistic teams and do things that a support arguably should not be doing, nobody is as easy and comfy and brain dead as xilonen. That's a compliment, by the way. That's a good thing. Probably the biggest case to be made against xilonen is Durin, who also shreds res for all but 2 elements for almost the same amount if you run him in a Hexencircle team. 20% by default, extra 75% through Hexencircle, which boosts him to 35 compared to xilonen's 36. He does it while applying his own element, while dealing significant damage, while having the whole Hexencircle thing in the first place. He enables other units. He's an insanely flexible teammate that provides a ton of offensive utility to a wide variety of units, shredding res for all but 2 elements, even taking a shot at xilonen herself with his Geo res shred. But I guess I shouldn't click off this passive, because this passive still requires that you trigger pyro reactions. Certain team comps, certain enemies with innate auras, all these things can potentially mess with Durin's res shred, but xilonen? Nope. Durin, Lali, and Chevy all requiring that you trigger reactions on an enemy to get the res shred, that is a condition that you aren't always able to meet. That's a condition that you might not be able to meet. Even if you can meet those conditions, in multi-wave content, they're not going to have full uptime on your buffs. You're going to have a few hits that aren't affected by res shred. Escoffier and Lauma only ask that you hit targets with their skills, and in Escoffier's case, burst, to access their res shred, but that still means that you don't have full uptime. And in Escoffier's case, who has a pretty single target skill, can you stop doing the worst idol of all time? Could you do anything else? Her single target skill will make res shred harder to get in AoE. Lauma perhaps has it the best when it comes to accessing her res shred, as it only requires her skill to hit and her skill pulses around her in an AoE, but it still requires you to hit opponents, and it's limited to 2 elements. And one of those elements, there's an artifact set that does the exact same thing. So it's like, oh wow, Lauma can shred res in AoE from off field? Cool. So can Anefa. Just put her on the right artifact set. Xilonen has uniquely comfy res shred. So comfy that people often choose to forego Ion-san in Mawika's best teams for the comfort that Xilonen brings. Now, to be fair, that also has to do with Xilonen's Night Soul point consumption and how it enables Mawika's burst. But that is still an aspect of Xilonen's kit. That is still her being a very comfy unit specifically for Mawika. Yes, Xilonen only has res shred, but that res shred is uniquely easy to get, it is extremely flexible, it has easily maintainable 100% uptime, and if that isn't enough for you, we also taped on some healing. Xilonen's burst is the second most important part about her comfort, because all it does is heal. Okay, well, I mean, it does hit once for like a not meaningless multiplier, but you're probably not going to build her for damage, so 2,000 is looking about right. And if she doesn't have those 2 other teammates that she needs to shred res, then it'll just deal damage 3 times instead of healing. But whatever, I'm getting off track. All it does, it deals damage once, and then it heals for a pretty significant amount. Single target, but it's pretty strong single target. And the fact that that's all it does is, again, another strength. The fact that her burst heals makes it so that it's a really nice utility added onto her kit, but the fact that it only heals makes it unnecessary to build her for energy and unnecessary to use the burst at all. A massive downside to 5 stars is that because Hoyo wants to sell them, they have to have these big pretty bursts where you look at them for a few seconds before they do whatever they're doing. So while these 5-star supports are numerically very, very strong, you have to build them with enough energy to consistently get their bursts, and then even worse, you have to use the burst and watch the animation. Like, Durin, buddy, I love you, but this cannot stand. Your buddy Gorou over here? It's not even close. It's not even close. Xilonen has the benefit of having a useful burst, but not a necessary one. She needs very little field time, she needs no setup, she doesn't need any sort of reactions. All of her requirements are within her team building. As long as you have the right units on your team, Xilonen will do everything that she's supposed to do. unless you're running scroll, which then you do have to do setups. But hey, you don't have to run scroll on her. I know Petra's very popular. I'm a big instructor xilonen fan. I've been on a kick, which I guess provides me a good segue. Because she doesn't do personal damage, she also doesn't have build requirements. She is a perfect instructor holder for this reason. At this point in the game's lifespan, xilonen is essentially a better version of archaic Petra Gorou. Yeah, that's how we're swinging back in. My original video, I pitched Gorou as a kind of weird pseudo-defensive unit because of his buffs, but the main thing that was holding me back from really recommending him and using him more often was the fact that he was so burst reliant, with this disgusting 80 cost burst and some absolutely horrid particle generation. xilonen is now doing what archaic Petra Gorou was doing, but as a 5-star. She's not great anywhere. She provides some offensive utility and some defensive utility. But to make up for the fact that she's not great everywhere, she's very, very easy to utilize to her maximum potential. So I think that's most of what I wanted to say with this video. Now that we've gone full circle and xilonen is not the best buffer ever anymore, and a team that can meet Gorou's restrictions and make use of his buffs have dragged him kicking and screaming back into the meta. So one final thing that I have to address before going. Well, I did mention that they have opposing conditions to give their buffs. If we're thinking about doing DPS xilonen, their conditions perfectly align, which this isn't really a thing I normally do. I don't really like straightforward DPSing units that aren't really meant to deal damage, unless it's through like reaction spam or something like that. You can see I haven't even leveled her normal attacks, which is what the scaling on her special skill normals rely on for some reason. I guess that's a third little thing that I'm just gonna get mad about. Every other unit that uses something that gives them different normal attacks has the scaling for the new normal attacks within whatever talent gave them. Flynn's uses a skill, he gets infused normal attacks, that's where the scaling are. Cyno uses his burst, that's where his scalings are. Same with Raiden burst, same with Nefer's skill. I know Clarand and Chaska are the same, Mualani, but for some reason, xilonen gets her special normals from her skill, but the scalings are in her normals, which maybe your reasoning is that she gets extra res shred from skill levels, so people are going to be inclined to crown this talent, and maybe they wanted to make people crown a different talent to do DPS xilonen, but that's just like scummy and weird. I don't know, I'm gonna stop thinking about it. In any case, I haven't leveled my normals. That was the point of that tangent. I guess maybe we could hit a Mora ley line to do a few pity levels and at least get it to like, I don't know, level 4. And I'll play this team while doing so. I mean, very basic concept. xilonen is also a defense scaling geo damage dealer if you play her in this way. She's a normal attacker, so throw in Yunjin and put her on the right artifact. Alright, she's all set. And because her buffing is quill based, she adds a portion of her own defense onto xiilonen's normal attacks. The scaling on xiilonen's own normal attacks is going to matter a bit less. Gorou, xilonen, Yunjin already meets my triple geo requirements for Gorou, and just like with Gorou, when we shift from using her as a support to a DPS, Durin goes from one of her biggest competition to one of her biggest allies. That geo res shred is coming in handy. You can easily replace either Gorou or Yunjin with Albedo, preferably Yunjin, because even though people were saying otherwise, I believe there is still some portion of Albedo's damage that snapshots, but even if there isn't, and Albedo doesn't have anything to snapshot from Gorou. Gorou does have a few full party buffs, and Albedo is just a good unit now that does all the things for Hex Array, while also dealing a significant amount of damage himself. But including Yunjin makes this team variation much more focused on xiilonen's personal damage, and less on Durin and Albedo's. Whatever, let's just go. What? These hilichurls are... I started this ley line, I didn't finish it, and these hilichurls just seem to have started wandering. Numbers. Yeah, look at that. That's not crazy. Oh wait, actually, you know what? That's my bad. That's entirely my bad. I forgot to swap. I don't know if this will greatly affect her damage. It should be somewhat significant. This is such a scuffed setup. I don't have any leveled artifacts. I don't have... Okay. That's fine. That's fine. We'll live with that. And we'll at least bring this to level 4. Screw it, level 5. This is extra. This is a treat. I didn't promise you guys DPS xilonen, so you don't get to complain about my bad representation in the comments. But yeah, this is a pretty good setup for her, all the things I mentioned. Plus, I've got her on my Haran to show off to the world, which is just a normal attack damage bonus stat stick, so it's pretty well made for her. Just keep in mind that these numbers could probably be pushed a little bit further. Ooh, look at those. 33k. Yeah, this is why most people, and me included, don't do a ton of DPS xilonen. I think that's a fun enough way to end off the video. Xilonen and Gorou working together and making the world happy. Thank you to my channel members for enabling my inconsistent release schedule. Dorsalfin from twitch.tv/dorsalfin1, Najodo, Rumpaltus, Pegby, Dadiz, Do, Zach, Mudkip, Beef Potato, Roberto Desu, Big Soup, Buffalo Milk, DB, Bab, Pyre's Flower, Amat, Starnova, Tayday, Aqua, and our new 2 members, Maho, Shoujo, Ruru, and Smoothie. Like smoothie without the H. I like that one. So thank you guys for supporting the channel every month. Thank everybody watching this video for all that you've done. I hope you learned something. Have a lovely day.